Hello, everyone. I'm Bruce Landsberg, Vice Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. On October 20, 2022, we hosted a roundtable discussion about flight data monitoring, specifically about practical FDM solutions for smaller operators. The goal was to show how small and medium-sized operators could use data to prevent crashes and improve safety. NTSB investigations have consistently shown effective FDM programs could have identified potential safety issues and prevented a crash. Note the term effective. Just installing the equipment does not help unless it is being analyzed regularly. NTSB has issued recommendations to the FAA to require data monitoring recorders for all passenger-carrying Part 135 operators. This came from a number of investigations, but specifically one into a crash involving an executive flight Hawker jet in Akron, Ohio in 2015. Too many times during an investigation, we asked the operator, how do you know that your pilots are doing the right thing? And too many times the answer has been, we don't know. Simply, that's unacceptable. Operators should know what's happening on their flight decks. With the variety of resources available today to analyze critical data, there's no excuse for not having a clearer picture of your safety posture, especially when carrying passengers. If it was your family, you'd expect that. That's why recorders and flight data monitoring is on the NTSB's most wanted list, and why we convened this roundtable. By the way, the full recording of our 2-hour roundtable is available on NTSB's YouTube channel. But we know that you're busy. So in this short video, we've made an effort to highlight the most significant points, our best takeaways from the discussion, and we hope you'll take note. During the discussion, the operator showed what worked for them. It's not as daunting or as costly as it might seem, and you'll hear from associations representing most Part 135 and Part 91 members on how this is an idea whose time has come. In these clips, you'll see how they've explored the challenges of implementation and then showed how they overcame them. The results: lower maintenance and operation costs, improved flight performance, and ultimately fewer mishaps, deviations, and safety issues. What's not to like? Let's look at some of the highlights. But before we begin, let's make sure we're on the same page. What does FDM mean? Morgan Bondi, one of the small operators at our roundtable, one jet, used Boeing's definition. It's the objective analysis of aircraft and operational systems that provide actionable data for continuous improvement. The key words here are actionable and continuous improvement. Now, what are some of the impediments to adoption, or as we called it, the elephant in the room? The common concerns were privacy, cost, equipment, resources, enforcement, regulatory concerns, punitive actions, and just general confusion. Tom Luperspecht of the FAA kicks off the conversation. Take a look at what he had to say about enforcement and compliance.
Many of you may remember several years ago we came up with this thing called the compliance philosophy, because it used to be you violate a rule, we're going to initiate an enforcement action against you. It's either going to come down to a suspension, a revocation, a monetary fine. And I hate to say we woke up, but we realized that the majority of the people out there operating aircraft in the NAS are willing or they're not intentionally violating the rules. And going down the enforcement path is not what we want to see. We don't get that money. What we really want to see is people back operating in compliance with the regulations. They're there to ensure safety in operations. So now the philosophy went to an actual policy. You can find that in our guidance, where the first thing that should be looked at by any inspector out there in the field is whether or not the operator, A, unintentionally violated those rules, and if they want to come back into compliance. Of course, I will say that intentional and criminal acts, they're off the table. You don't get immunity for those. But that's where we've shifted our focus in just bringing people and helping people come back into compliance with the rules. And sometimes they may have a process or a procedure or an SOP or something that maybe is missing a piece that we can try to help them with. We had to have a way of saying, if you give us this information, here's what we'll do with it. It's kind of like if we have to come get the information, it's going to be a little bit different. But the operators generally, when something happens, they have an incident or an accident, they're as actively engaged as finding out what happened as us at the FAA or our friends at the NTSB. So that's why we've established programs like Flight Operations Quality Assurance. Morgan and I were talking about that this morning, and you heard him mention it briefly. We also have programs like ASAP, the Aviation Safety Action Program, where you operators look at what happened and the information you glean. When you share that with us, then there are certain, for example, under FOQA, Flight Operations Quality Assurance, there's a regulatory assurance of privacy for you. And that enforcement action won't be taken based on the information that is voluntarily provided to us. And that's a statutory requirement that was incorporated into regulations. The same thing that applies to FOQA applies to programs like ASAP, where there's no statutory requirement, but we've given assurances that we're not going to use that information against you. The statutory requirements also say that any information that we do share is going to be redacted and the privacy maintained.
So I think cost is definitely an area that can be an impediment. I think about in our operation, single airplane, we have FOQA flight data monitoring on the flight deck. We're also subscribed for engine data monitoring and so forth. And those costs are not insignificant. But use an example on aircraft maintenance monitoring, let's say on the engines. We talked to different operators where they'll one day receive a call from the engine manufacturer and say, hey, we've been watching your trend data and we're noticing a slow to close start valve. And maybe they've had 5 or 6 trips where the valve's closing slower, the flight crew doesn't notice it. It's not something that we would track other than that the start valve did close prior to continuing with the next engine start. And then by them receiving that phone call, maintenance is able to proactively get ahead of that issue and address it before it becomes a problem when we're halfway around the world. And when we think about that cost-benefit analysis of the cost of that program in comparison to what's the cost of us to recover a trip on the other side of the world, that gets incredibly expensive, sometimes incredibly difficult. So I think that's how we think about that cost-benefit of that cost.
As you start to get these quotes of, I guess there's a spectrum of what you need, like you talked about. So I think, not letting cost think you need the multi-$1,000 analytics per tail solution might not be where you need to start in. So starting in at the shallow end of the pool and kind of wading up there, and just start with a few parameters, and even there you can start learning more about your operation, probably a lot more than you'd imagine.
You don't have to outfit the entire fleet all at once. You can start with 1 or 2 airplanes if you've got 24, and you'll get benefit from that with a small initial outlay. You can test it, you can build your culture, you can do all those things, and then as your fleet grows, your mission grows, your finances grow, you can add to that fleet as you go.
Hopefully, we've addressed some of your concerns related to implementing a program. Now, let's see how incorporating an FDM program is possible, worthwhile, and good business. In this next segment, the operators show us how this was beneficial to improve efficiency and, of course, safety. Here are some of the clips from those real-world case studies.
So Liberty is a private Christian university. We've got about 100,000 students, of whom about 4,000 are studying aviation. In my role as Director of Safety, I oversee our flight data monitoring program, and that's provided some valuable insights into our organization. In 2016, we rolled out a formal flight data monitoring program overseen by an FDM committee with real strong just culture emphasis. And the main tool we use is one of the tools that Jens was just talking about through the ASIAS program. And so that allows us to upload large batches of data, and with just a couple clicks, we can see, did anyone exceed VNE? Did they get too fast? Did anyone fly upside down? Did anyone over-G the airplane? And just kind of seeing those parameters, being able to evaluate the trends over time, being able to look at the severity and see, okay, I had this many exceedances, but which ones were the worst? Which ones should I be focused on? Has been really valuable. Having a good understanding, a good baseline understanding of where your organization is, just helps give a lot of wisdom to decision making.
3 years ago, I joined Adobe as one of our pilots and also as our safety manager. And it was kind of a unique situation. It was a brand new flight department. And I think that something that was really unique there was we got to build a flight department from the ground up. And so in those early conversations with leadership, we started talking about what do we want our safety program to look like. And everybody had a very strong appetite for continuous improvement and also had familiarity or previous experience using flight data monitoring in their safety program. You know, we have a lot of data that does come into a safety management system. However, we talked earlier at the beginning about the definition of flight data monitoring, and I'd argue it's one of the most, if not the only, objective piece of data or set of data that you have coming into your safety management system. But it's not the only data. And we really view the flight data in our flight data monitoring program as a piece of the puzzle. It might describe what happened, and it's great. We can look at second by second of something that might have happened on the flight deck. But then when we paint the full picture with discussions from flight crews, we might go ask for air traffic control data, we might ask for other things. We really get a holistic picture of what happened, how it happened, why it happened. And then as we put those things through our safety management system, we're really able to come out the other side and try to define, do we need to change our policies? Do we need to update our training? Are there standard operating procedures that we could adapt or develop? We decided we needed to figure out where do we get data to define where are the hazards that we may not know about. But we were able to turn to the industry and say, hey, these are challenges around pilot proficiency. And as we watched our data through those proficiency flights and as we started to resume normal operations, we were able to see a general flat line in our event rate. And we really attribute that to leveraging our flight data monitoring program from the industry perspective and pull that data and use it for our benefit. Here's another example that we used. So when we think about hazards and risks within aviation, we might look at our own data and maybe we don't generate any events. But we think it's really important to turn back to the industry and look at what are the risks and hazards that we're seeing across the industry. And runway excursions have been a very high topic for quite a while now. So I think benchmarking is important. And if we look at the left graph here, we can see that our average touchdown point was about 1,300 feet down the runway and roughly 10 to 15% better than the industry average. There was the punitive discussion earlier about how that can be viewed, and I really think flight data monitoring has the ability, if you can shift the discussion of what it really is. And we look at professional athletes. I think that they're one of the best analogies that you can use in flight data monitoring. And every time a player takes the field, they maybe go play that game for 90 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever the game is that they're playing. But then countless amount of time, significantly more time than they spend playing the game, is actually spent reviewing their game footage. They're looking at what went really well. Where were there opportunities for improvement? And it's all in the interest of how do they take the field better next time? And so I think by shifting that mentality around flight data monitoring as it's this really powerful tool for continuous improvement, I think we continue to change the story of what a successful flight data monitoring program looks like.
We sat down early on and started road mapping where we want to take our SMS program, and part of that roadmap included flight data monitoring. It wasn't going to be our first step because we had a lot of components to get in there, but really, being deliberate. So if you're just going into now thinking about, hey, how can I integrate FDM into my own SMS, as an integral part of that entire system, be deliberate about it and figure out where you want it to be and how it's going to be complementary to your other systems in there. So if you don't have ASAP and you don't have some of those other programs first, I'd encourage you to start with that before you start getting into FDM, or else you're you're just jumping into an area that really you're probably not going to be prepared for. So as we started laying that out and we roadmapped this, with our CEO and everything else, they were fully complimentary of looking not where we're at now, but hey, where's our flight department going to be in 5 years? Because we're starting to scale and building that program. So some of that managing expectations of, well, I'm not going to find an off-the-shelf solution, so what can I start doing? And it starts with the basics of that bottom graph there of I was able to start pulling CSV, just files of data off the planes with a simple SD card in the MFD off the Garmin 3000. So we started at least collecting that and knowing what we could do. And then as we transitioned to knowing our fleet's all over, so it's difficult to get the data download, we found a solution with AirSync that's very cost effective and enabled, Bluetooth enabled to instantly upload the data to the cloud. So now I could have that access to that data more quickly, but also some basic graphs of what's provided there where you could start doing some comparisons of airspeed, altitude, and some basic analysis as you're moving forward. We can't be the only ones trying to figure this out on our own. So with Frank's leadership, we started that beta test group of bringing in Cloud Ahoy as a partner to look at, hey, they have a really good individual debrief tool that a lot of people are familiar with. Can they aggregate that data? As I mentioned before, I can't watch 50 replays of a video in a day as a single person, so that's not really valuable to me. But if they can identify there's an exceedance, and now I can know to go look for that flight, that's where it's going to get valuable. And you'll see just some of those samples there of what that's possible now.
When we first started Tidal Aviation almost 11 years ago, there was an accident actually here in Florida that gained a lot of attention within our industry. It was involving a high-performance single-engine piston aircraft, and it was actually a pilot that had rented the aircraft from an operator. And the flight data actually was discovered that the pilot was conducting a low-level aerobatic maneuvers, and he unsuccessfully attempted a aileron roll at low altitude, and it didn't work out. But upon further investigation of the flight data and going back deeper into the aircraft's flight data recorder, we discovered it wasn't the first time that he had done this. It had happened several occasions prior to that. So it was kind of, this accident was really at the heart of when we were starting. It was on the forefront of my mind as we're renting these high-performance single-engine aircraft. How are we going to safeguard these million-dollar assets? And so that's really been at the core of our philosophy since day one. Early on, we started with just basic $15 SD card in the making sure that the avionics were recording the data, but manually uploading the data once every 28 days was a little bit of an impediment. And so we went to the air, doing basically a cellular uplink device that receives the data via Bluetooth, and then after you shut the plane down, it automatically uploads all the data to a cloud-based program. Trying to get flight instructors to buy into some of this has been part of the challenge, and I think this smart board right here was probably the biggest key to the whole operation and getting everybody's buy-in. When they complete the flight, they go back up to their debriefing room, and the whole flight is right there instantly. They don't have to log in, and the customers are really loving this too. So everybody gets their own account. One of the things that as it's uploaded, it looks at our scheduling software program and captures the person's name and email, and then loads it directly to their account. So it's very private in the way it's handled. Nobody's looking at other people's flights. The only people involved in it would be the flight instructor and the pilot.
In that segment, we saw how 4 operators of various sizes got some real benefit from their programs. How can you do this? One of the critical first steps, according to our panelists, was getting buy-in. See what some of them had to say about selling it to management and employees.
Setting up a flight data monitoring program, I think the first thing that an operator needs to do is put up a mirror and ask the question, why do we want to do this? What's the true genesis of making this investment? Is it continuous improvement, or is it we're trying to chase down, rogue pilots or so forth? If it's the latter, I think that's a cultural discussion that needs some focus first prior to implementing an FDM program. But when you can start from the continuous improvement side of things, you're definitely off on the right path. And then to drive the buy-in further, this might sound a little counterintuitive, but I'd argue that everybody that's a member of your organization, they need to have a show me moment. And what I mean by a show me moment is they need to be part of something that didn't go right. And they need to witness and experience firsthand how the team shows up in this event. And I think that has profound impacts across the organization and for individuals as they go through these events, because that firsthand experience is going to drive their view of that safety program into perpetuity. So when they come in, if they, their first 3 months on the job, maybe they go out and they have a pretty rough, unstabilized approach. Can they become comfortable with sharing the story about the unstabilized approach? They get to witness how the safety program rallies around them. They get to witness how leadership rallies around them.
And on that, we're talking FDM, but on the ASAP side, one of the things when we bring on a new member that I'd love to see is the first ASAP report is submitted by the chief pilot or the DO, right? It's building that culture of I'm going to share with you, my colleagues, my experience. So when you have the chief pilot and DO flying that FOCO-equipped airplane and briefing, this is what happened on my flight to their flight department, that really builds that sense of, hey, we're in this together. This isn't a witch hunt. I'm showing you my dirty laundry, so to speak. And it goes exactly to what we were saying here is it just builds that culture of it isn't punitive. We're here trying to get better.
So, what's available out there? First, it helps to understand the market. Here, Jens Henning of Gamma reviews the current penetration of FDM use in aircraft and the manufacturer's perspective on data collection.
The chart on the left that you're looking here is current turbine business airplanes in production. What can you do? So that slight little sliver up there in the gray is there's just not a data recorder. The rules didn't require it when the aircraft was designed. The design is 10, 15, 20 years old. And we do produce aircraft for that long. But as you see there, it's a sliver, single-digit percentage of current turbine production fleet that it doesn't come with a recorder capability. And I promised everybody I won't shame one manufacturer or another, but those are the kind of models that are sold that in the next couple of years, they're not even produced, which means over the next few years, if you're buying a turbine airplane, it's going to have a recording capability. The big orange graph there, that's the standard box ED112, ED155 box. And as you see there's quick math here, it's in the 70-80% range here. And then the other part, the SD card, the embedded recorder, and non-standard box just in the aircraft. So we're really high with recording data on turbine airplanes. On the right side, let's look at the FDM capability. Try to pick good colors here, but they're very inconsistent. So let me just walk you through it if you can't really read it. The gray there is, I described it as no access to FDR. And one of the companies sent me an email, was like, well, you can go over to the aircraft with a laptop specifically configured, plug yourself in and download the data. Probably not what you would be doing on a regular basis here. So that's about a third of the fleet where we're still in that situation that there's no easy way to get the data off the aircraft unless you either get an STC, a service bulletin, or something like that. But the rest of the data here, I won't step through the details here, but the other 2/3, 70-80% there that you see up there on the graph, there's either just standard QAR, the quick access recorder, or the Wi-Fi enabled that just provides a nimble program. Either standard from the OEM, service bulletin from the OEM, you got to opt into it usually, or there's an optional thing from the OEM. This does not get into the aftermarket, but if you're buying an aircraft today, these are the capabilities that are out there. So first of all, NTSB's long story about we need data recorders on the aircraft. I would say on the left side of the graph, we've gotten pretty darn close to it for the fleet here. Again, it stopped at the turbine side, but on the piston side, there's also other side here. Over the past decade, the conversation about participating in that safety program I talk to my members, but the most important voice that they can hear is from their customers. Hey, I want to buy a new airplane. For speccing that, as part of that, I want to have an ability to get the data off the aircraft because I want to participate in a program. When our OEMs hear it, they build it into the next rev here, and as you see there, we're at not only the majority, but converging on most of the fleet there that have at least an option, and lately even just standard to get it either as a QA or a Wi-Fi enabled off the aircraft.
Another way to analyze your data is through available Aviation Association resources. Now remember, you don't have to be a member of these organizations to tap into some free options to better understand your data. There's a lot out there. Let's watch.
I would love to come up with a number, but there's so many programs, and that's probably that's a good thing, but there's so many programs that I couldn't get into. You know how many you have. Cloud Ahoy has a certain number, CFOCO has a third one. The SIS one, which is a subset overlapping there, there's a public list of 150, 160 plus universities. We've looked at the data. It needs to be more. If I look at our colleagues over on the airline side, for example, in a program like SIS, it is high 90% that you participate in a FOCWA and or ASAP program. That is something we should be striving toward.
If you do a search of your NBA app, little plug here, for data, you'll find about 4 dozen companies out there that are offering something related to data. Go find them, see if one of them has a solution for you. And if not, just use the device that you did the search on, because there's probably a solution you can put on here that will get you started down that track. This is the norm going forward. This is going to be expected. And I think for those of us that haven't yet found that solution, I would encourage you to seek out your peers, find those companies, those solutions that will work for you. The end state of flight data monitoring is a state in which we're comfortable sharing the data. So programs like SIS that are the consumers of flight data, pilot reports, that kind of thing, is where we want people to get to. But as I've seen, lacking a mandate, which is going to be solved here in a little bit, that's a journey. People have got to get comfortable culturally with the fact somebody's looking at their performance. They have to get comfortable with the fact that we're now going to hold each other accountable to our performance and use that as an opportunity to improve. We've got to get comfortable knowing that I'm going to be, my data is going to be used to improve the operation as a whole. And only at that point, I think, is the operator then going to be comfortable getting to a point where they're wanting to share that data. I have a feeling the number of operators that are participating in some sort of flight data monitoring program is a lot higher than the numbers that we have sharing the data.
I would add to that is that we're sharing the data today whether we realize it or not. So a couple of really brief examples. We manage a lot of ASAP programs. I spend a lot of time on YouTube. So one of my operators had their flight show up on YouTube because somebody had the NTSB data, had the live ATC data, and there it was with the flight number, tail number, this course deviation in that case. The data is out there. So we can choose to sit back and let the YouTubers of the world analyze our data for us and go to the court of public opinion and tell us what we could have done differently. Or we can be proactive. We can take our own data in, we can analyze it ourselves, and we can strive to be more professional, more precise.
In our roundtable, we addressed the impediments to adoption, showed you how some operators are incorporating FDM into their operations, and highlighted some available programs. What did the panelists think about some of the key takeaways from our 2-hour discussion? Watch this next segment for a summary of key insights, and perhaps take some notes.
We can mandate safety all we want, but the end users are the ones that make things safe. And from the FAA's perspective, you know, we're really welcome to the industry stepping up and managing their safety programs. And whether or not we actually get it approved, you know, like the FOCWA has to be an approved program, that doesn't mean you can't have one. It's just like SMS. It's only required for 121, but it doesn't mean you can't have one.
Something that I didn't necessarily realize, I've had a pretty narrow focus over the past 10 to 15 years, and that's been larger turbine category aircraft. And we've been solving those problems within that ecosystem. But hearing from Andrew about what's going on in primary flight training at Liberty, the previous session there was the discussions around Embry-Riddle and their FOCA programs, their ASAP programs. I think that that's energizing another generation. And as these young professionals leave the training environment and start coming into professional flight organizations, they're going to have the opportunity to influence and become leaders in their own organizations. And I think that's where we'll see the most impactful change, as we see that next generation of aviators coming into organizations, and they've been used to it by this point.
I didn't realize how many other programs are available. SIAS wasn't aware of that. And so in learning about some of these other programs is interesting to me to see that there's other tools available to us that we could be using and utilizing.
I guess changing perspective on, the scalability, not only, we've talked about SMS, but scalability of flight data monitoring. If your notion of flight data monitoring is the program that's at United with full playback capability and everything else, that seems like, man, I'm never going to get there. Why would I even start that journey? But listening to, just how we've kind of all muddled through and found our own roadmaps of getting to a place, or, what you're doing is flight data monitoring on your single plane, right?
The smallest operator, yeah.
Right.
It can be done.
So, every journey begins with a step. So, I think I've just learned, maybe that's my ideal, is where the trajectory I want to get to, but, you just have to start somewhere.
For several years it's been, and I've been part of these discussions, early 2000s, this was big and scary, and cultural challenges, and those are the harder ones. I think they're mostly behind us, the technology is behind us. It's not six-figure number investment to get it on the airplane anymore. It's a different figure for most operators. So FDM to me becomes that baseline safety for most operations, especially if you're involved with the more advanced part of the aviation or holding yourself out. To me, that is now baseline safety, and it should be an expectation of, I would say so, the public, that you're doing this kind of activity, but probably your owners, your operators, and individual pilots.
The number of folks that are interested in this is growing and growing and growing. And I think we are just we're reaching a critical mass where this is just going to break out. It is going to become the regular part of doing business. And I think that is a remarkable place to be, and I'm thrilled to be on the stage with this group of people who are going to help us get there.
We've achieved something today with this panel in that it's reinforcing that there's a solution for everyone. Big and small, complex and non-complex, from training all the way up through regular frequent operations. There's a solution for everyone out there.
The true value of flight data monitoring is allowing us to see accident precursors before we have to grieve the loss of another pilot. When we have those precursors in the data, and then, as an industry, as a flight training industry, we lose a couple airplanes every year to a fatal stall on climb out. It just really, it really emphasizes how much more work there is to do, and how much we as an industry need to continue to strive towards safety. So FDM is a powerful tool, and it's certainly one that is exciting and is dynamic. But the ultimate purpose, I think, really is to reduce the number of accidents that the NTSB, are having to come out and investigate.
Andrew from Liberty University summed it up best. It's all about saving lives, protecting the lives of our passengers and the lives of our pilots. Flight data monitoring, if done properly, can ensure we minimize the risk and build a culture of safety. So, those are some of the highlights from our roundtable. We hope that this will encourage you to consider FDM. No one size fits all. Adopt and adapt a program that works for you. There's a solution out there, and more are coming online all the time. Measuring and improving safety isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. Thank you for watching.